John McMullen. Usually middle of the week, we'll kind of go around the league, take a look at all the top stories. But, of course, the Eagles tomorrow night. So we'll get all the latest news and notes on the Birds with Johnny Mack, plus the disaster that's happening in New York with the Giants, what is going down in Dallas with the Cowboys. Redskins kind of keeping a low pro inside the NFC East. We'll dive in on all of the division teams here on the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. Haven't seen the schedule yet this week. We'll do that on tomorrow's show. I have no idea who Washington or Dallas are playing this week. New York, for that matter, either. I kind of like it that way when they spring these games on me tomorrow. But I know I'll have to look because I'm pretty intrigued by what Dallas and at least Washington have. I don't think the Giants are going to be in the lexicon for a while here, other than the fact that, John, the Giants have kind of turned into a dumpster fire all of a sudden. Teams around the league are having all sorts, it sounds like, internal strife. Is that just coincidental that it's happening this year, that all these teams seem like they're having some locker room issues? Or do you think there's a grander situation happening here with the daily tug of, should we do something about this whole flag thing? Should we not do something about it? What say you?
No, I don't think it's any different than most seasons. I think, the Giants specifically, that's a perfect example. Generally, when things go off the rails with any team, there's a lot of dissension. There's a lot of finger pointing. So, I mean, I think it's pretty evident why things are going south there. And as far as the national anthem issue, I mean, I think that's a bigger issue for the league as a whole. As I pointed out before, Donald Trump's comments, as big as the story was for the national media, less than 1% of the players in the National Football League were actually doing something during the national anthem, whether it was kneeling or, as Malcolm does, raising his fist. Less than 1%. So, I mean, it was overblown to begin with. I think it continues to be overblown. There were certain owners, certain coaches as well, who had already talked to their players and instructed them that they wanted them to stand and pay respect to the flag. And again, it's an individual choice. It's an individual team's choice. Now the league is sort of trying to put together a standard rule to try to get through this controversy. I think it's too late. I think they made a mistake originally. But nonetheless, I think it's one of those things that's overblown because of the incendiary nature of the thought process behind it.
Yesterday, obviously, the league put out a statement. It was kind of a cold statement. I mean, it wasn't like we're taking a stance on this kind of statement, right? I mean, it was just kind of like, we got to do something, so we'll just kind of like short arm something out there.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even a statement. It was a memo that sort of leaked, and obviously they leaked it, so they wanted it out. But it's sort of, taking the temperature of can they get away with this, and that's been the NFL's problem in many, many issues.
Right, they don't take a stance.
Go far beyond this. They're very, very afraid to take a stance. And as I always say, I mean, they're a private organization.
Right.
They have a right to set their own rules. And, there's a lot of rules players don't like. Some of them are on-field rules. Defensive players, trust me, do not like all the recent rule changes to where they can't hit quarterbacks and receivers in the open field. But, hey, they have to accept them if they want to be part of this league. There are off-the-field rules they don't like. Smoking marijuana being a perfect example. They could be fined. They could be suspended. They don't like it, but it's a rule they have to abide by. This is the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's really no different.
Well, they don't want to take a stance because they don't want to have the same penalties for their higher profile players than they do the lower profile player.
Well, I don't know if it's that. I think they're afraid of the controversy it might create. I think that's a bigger thing. Nobody is going to not want to play this game. I mean, think about it. If you're a star player, you could say, well, Jerry Jones' comments are he's not going to play anybody if they kneel during the national anthem. And people, grandiosely say on social media, well, what if the whole team kneels down? What's he going to do? That's a fair point. The other fair point is, why are they going to kneel down when a lot of them make a heck of a lot of money, and you think they're going to walk away from making that money? You got to be realistic on both sides of the fence. This is a business decision by the NFL. They're trying to protect the brand, and they have to be wary of both sides of the fence.
Right.
You're not going to make anybody happy.
They're in a tough spot.
They're in a very difficult spot. The problem is, by hemming and hawing, they make it worse. They should have immediately said, I said, this is the easiest way to do it. It said, look, if you're on the field, you have to stand at attention for the national anthem. If you have a problem with that, stay in the locker room, stay in the tunnel. And that would have been the best case scenario.
Well, wait, it wasn't one of the reasons why they're on the field to begin with is that they were paid by the military to be out there?
No, they had that paid for patriotism scandal, but the NFL's, this sort of goes back to Pete Rozelle years and years ago, who tried to tie in the league with sort of a patriotic fervor to create a sort of a new national pastime. At that time, baseball was the national pastime, and it worked. Obviously, the NFL has become the most popular sport in the country. I don't think much of it has to do with that, but it was a little part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it dates back many, many decades. And as far as, the NFL getting paid to do certain patriotic things, that's true, and that's a bit of a scandal. But
over $12 million bucks, from what I understand.
Yeah, that's not why they wanted people to stand for the national anthem. I mean, that dated back, as I said, decades.
Well, I don't know that it was. They wasn't asking them to stand for the anthem, because at this time there wasn't any thought that anybody was going to do anything other than stand, whether they were going through the motions or not. It was, if you're on the field with the flag out there, that it will draw more attention and we'll be able to enlist more soldiers.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily that. From the armed services standpoint, sure, they used it as a advertising tool.
Right, a recruiting tool.
There's no question about that. But I think people forget there's always been civil unrest in this country. I mean, there's always something. If you go all the way back to Vietnam, I mean, there's a lot of people that probably didn't want to stand for the national anthem at that time.
Mm-hmm.
There's always been issues people feel very, very strongly about. This is nothing new. It's just because of the age we're in, social media, Twitter, Facebook, immediacy, all of that, it's blown up to be a bigger deal. And again, I think the NFL wants to get past it desperately, and that's what they attempted to do with that memo.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they tripped up at the beginning of this.
Well, and according to some reports out there, they're going to have what? There's no proposal prepared. They're going to have an owners meeting next week that would mandate players to stand at attention for the national anthem, but there is no proposal out there. Then you had yesterday the memo that gets sent out there. Then you have Jerry Jones with what he said. And now there's some reports that people inside the Cowboys locker room, they're all up in arms because they feel then what happened in Arizona with them was a farce. I mean, so it sounds like this thing is affecting different teams differently if they're allowing it to. Hence, Pittsburgh, it looks like they're having some issues. You're hearing the rumblings in Dallas now.
Yeah, and I think, that was the misstep at the beginning of it.
Right.
Because I don't think a lot of people know, for instance, Pittsburgh is a perfect example. Mike Tomlin asked his players to stand during the national anthem, and they did. And for the most part, here, Doug did the same thing, and they did. And I think the president didn't help matters because there are so many people who dislike him.
Right.
So by him chiming in, it became more of a standing up to Donald Trump thing. And
this is where this thing went off the rails. Because, as you said, John, these teams are privately owned entities. They can just lay down the law and say, look, this is the rule where you, like the Yankees do, you can't have facial hair. If you want to work here, this is the rules. If you don't do it, you're fired, or you get another job and go work for a different team. I mean, that's essentially – they didn't need to react in the way. They could have just said, look, you can have your opinion, Mr. President. That's what makes this country so great. You have your opinion. We don't have to listen to it. We're going to have the rules in place the way we want to do it. The fact that they try to defy and almost stand up and then back down, it makes it look ridiculous.
Yeah, and it does. And again, if you take the Trump part of this out, it's not a problem. It really isn't. We're probably past it.
Right.
We probably are. And it is. It's because it's not about the national anthem any longer. And I'm not talking about particular players. Each player, you have to get into their individual reasons for doing things. It's certainly not something. For instance, here, Malcolm Jenkins is he's very involved in these issues, and it's very meaningful to him. And it was before Donald Trump's comments. It will be after. And it will be long after everyone stops talking about it. However, for other players, it's just, I don't like that guy.
Right.
And, I mean, that's hijacking whether you agree with the thought behind it or not. That's not what this is supposed to be about, the disagreement with one man. But that's what this country is. Right. I mean, it's 50-50. People like Donald Trump. People hate Donald Trump. And it's bizarre to me. It really is.
Right. And you could have 32 different teams with 32 different sets of rules. That's the way, all 32 do not have to uniform in this situation.
The Yankees example is a good one because a lot of young people think that is the stupidest thing in the world. And Clint Frazier, who's one of their top prospects, one of the top prospects in baseball, he came in with the long hair and he tried to, he wanted Mickey Mantle's number and he wanted to keep his hair. And they're like, no, this is the New York Yankees. You want to play for us? You're gonna abide by these arcane rules, and that's their right.
Yeah,
that's their right.
Sure, absolutely. John McMullen, yeah, go ahead.
No, but and obviously. As I pointed out with many NFL rules that players disagree with, I don't think they look at it logically like that. There's always going to be rules by your employer. There are things in Town Square Media you don't agree with, Mike. You're not going to say it on the air. We're not going to say it on the air. But that we would be the first people in recorded history to agree with everything with our various employers if we did. Everybody has an issue with something. But you don't have to work for them. If it's that big of a deal for you, you can go do something else.
Oh, there's no question. There are many times in all of our jobs where it's, hey, this is what I have to do. I think it's ridiculous that I have to do it. But if I say something, I'm going to be looking for another job. And there's nothing different here. These owners could go say, look, go do this on your own time. You're not doing it on my time. Now, some of them that first week, they didn't say that, and now some of them are trying to backtrack, and that's where you've got all this, and we'll see what happens from it. I just find it to be a shame for some people. I've seen people that I'm stunned and surprised by that have said they're not watching football anymore. People that I know pretty well that are big-time football fans, and they say they're not watching. Now, it's not a lot. I feel bad for those people. It's their right to not watch. I feel bad for them. I'm surprised, but the fact that it's gotten that far is it's amazing to me.
And I will say on that side of the fence, I feel bad for them also for a different reason. I don't think they understand. You have both sides, and I said this before on the show, and I said it on Countdown to Kickoff as well. You have both sides screaming at the top of their lungs and talking about First Amendment issues and free speech. And both sides don't realize the whole point of free speech is not for the people you agree with. It's for the people you disagree with. And no side, either side of this, can't seem to understand that.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Let's look at the game, the Eagles and the Panthers. Fletcher Cox, your thoughts. I know yesterday, it sounded like, okay, he's practicing, but he might just kind of be a gamesmanship here. Feeling any different today? He does make the trip.
I mean, a little bit because he's making the trip. I still think it's gamesmanship just because of the timing of the calendar. And I wouldn't want to push it because you have 11 days of rest. I think it just makes logical sense if there's any doubt to not play in this game, especially after you beat the Cardinals. I think the mentality changes if you lose that game. Then you need Fletcher as much as possible. But the reality is they're 4-1. They're going on the road during a short week in a tough environment, so it's going to be difficult with them or without them. I just think they're going to err on the side of caution, but they are going above and beyond. My thing is, if he was 100% and he wasn't on the injury report, he wasn't listed as questionable, and there was no doubt that he was completely healthy, of course, then you play him. Mm-hmm. But obviously that's not the case because he's a game-time decision.
And he was very coy about it himself yesterday. I mean, it was kind of a direct question, and he circled every way around to give you nothing.
Yeah. And I was in that scrum, and that's exactly what I pointed out. I mean, he was being very non-committal and trying to fend it off, which is another indication that at least the Eagles are thinking about what I just said and the fact that that's 11 days. That's 11 big, important days for something to rest a calf. Whereas if you go out there and play 60 minutes of football and, God forbid, you aggravate it, and then you're set back one of your best defensive players. So I think it just makes sense. If there's any question, and I think there is, the Eagles are going to hold on.
We know Lane Johnson is out for the game. Vaitai will start. Just give us a little indication on the loss there against this defensive line of Carolina. Starlo Tulele, a guy that, he plays on the inside. He's a problem for the interior of the line. But what will Vaitai be matched up with?
Well, Charles Johnson, veteran guy, knows how to play, but he's not been very good this season. He's a descending player. So the good news is it isn't Ryan Kerrigan, as it was last year in his first start on the road when he was completely blown up.
And he did get some time last week, just so he's not going cold out there this week.
Yeah, and that's part of it, But I think, and I talked a little bit to Frank Reich about that, was that, sometimes it's easier when you have to go in game because guys aren't obviously game planning for you. They didn't expect Vaitai to be in there. And then the second part of it is obviously the Cardinals were also already, basically out of the game when he did enter. So all of that, and this time Carolina knew Lane Johnson wasn't going to be able to go through the concussion protocol. They know he's not going to be there. They know Vaitai is going to be there, and you can bet they're going to game plan for that.
Yeah.
And that's why, maybe one-on-one you look at it and say Charles Johnson isn't a dominating presence that you can't deal with, but all of a sudden if you start overloading blitzes, and you talk about those linebackers, Thomas Davis, Shaq Thompson on the outside.
Hey, good.
Yeah, they're really good.
Third in the league in sacks, Carolina. 17 times they've gotten to the quarterback. Wendell Smallwood, knee. If they play tomorrow night, most likely out. If they played on Sunday, a shot?
Yeah, I mean, it's questionable, so he's got to be close. And the fact that he didn't even practice, at least Fletcher practiced on Tuesday, which is the only real practice day. Today's more of a walkthrough, and I kind of project if guys would be ready on the injury report for a real practice. So he's getting closer, but same type of thing. Because he's not been able. Remember, it's not only this week, which the practice time is so limited. He wasn't able to practice at all last week, so he hasn't been on the field for a long time. I think it's going to be – I would be stunned to see if Wendell was out there on Thursday.
Yeah, and obviously the Eagles made it without him last week. They made it without Fletcher last week. We'll see if they have to play without those two. But Lane Johnson, we know the record without him, not so good. We'll see how that affects this team. A lot of major injuries this year that the Eagles have persevered through, and obviously this one is the biggest challenge for them against a Carolina team that is pretty good. What has been the turnaround for this team, John? Why have they gone from Super Bowl team, Super Bowl runner-up, we should say, to non-playoff team to 4-1?
Well, I think this is closer to who the Panthers are. I think a lot of it is just the rebound from the Super Bowl hangover. I think Super Bowl hangovers can be real. They were obviously real for Carolina. I never thought they were a 15-1 team, but there's too much talent there to be 6-10 as well. So I think this is kind of the real Carolina Panthers. And hey, they have some difficult people to deal with, and it starts with Cam Newton, obviously, maybe the biggest dual threat in this league, former MVP. Plus, they have Christian McCaffrey now. They use a lot of misdirection, a lot like the Chiefs did, and you saw that give the Eagles fits at times. And the second part is the receivers are so big. You're 6'5" guys, and not only. You know, if you look at Tampa, when they had Mike Evans, they still have Mike Evans, but Vincent Jackson, Austin Severian Jenkins back, when they had three big targets, they were all, you know, pretty well put together, but these guys are monsters, Benjamin and Funchess. So not only are they tall, but they can beat you up physically and sort of play the game of basketball, and that's going to be interesting. Because obviously Jalen Mills and Patrick Robinson are not the biggest guys in the world.
All right, we have that game for you live on 97.3 ESPN tomorrow night. And, of course, Merrill and Mike have that call. 8:25, the Countdown to Kickoff show starts at 6 from the Rusty Nail in Cape May. And, of course, obviously we'll have plenty of coverage on tomorrow's show. Tomorrow, pick the perfect score at 5:30. You're playing for $300. Johnny Mac, back tomorrow. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thanks,